my name is Dave Reske, CEO of Now Speed Marketing, and welcome to this edition of Marketing in the Now, where we tell stories of rapidly scaling businesses to leverage the best in digital marketing. And my guest today is Brian Bakstran. He is the former CMO of NetApp and Veeam and other organizations with deep experience, and he's had a lot of experience leading large organizations and managing significant growing marketing teams. Brian, welcome to the show.
David, thank you very much, and Happy New Year. Glad to be here.
Yes, I really appreciate you joining. I'm looking forward to this conversation. You've been doing digital and content marketing for a long time for large organizations. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in the industry? What has kind of captured your kind of attention over the last year?
Sure. Yeah, so I think for folks like us who have been in it for a while, we've seen some dramatic changes. Certainly the competition and the need to really differentiate yourself from a messaging standpoint, from a content that is really engaging, etc. But certainly tools like 6 Sense and the ability to really go out into the dark web and search for individuals or companies that are looking for your type of technology and being able to retarget them. And I would say, for me, certainly in the last 10 years, that to me is one of the biggest advances. It used to be, as you know, you would do your go after your database and you would post on certain sites to try and get people's attention. But the fact that you can target people who never came to your site, who may not even know who you are, and go after them with messaging is huge.
Wow, yeah, we're going to talk more about that. I'm sure that's a powerful technique and technology that's out there now. I want to focus on some of your experience leading large organizations, because you've certainly done that for many years. And I want to talk about some of the keys that you've seen in building, large, integrated, aligned, successful global marketing organizations. How many adjectives can I use in one sentence?
There you go. That's right. But they're all relevant.
Yeah.
I think I've always looked at it as you need to think globally, but act locally. Getting consistency across 3 distinct regions is not an easy thing to do from an organizational standpoint, from a cultural standpoint. The go-to-markets and the priorities and competition partners differ from region to region, and certainly within EMEA and Asia Pac, it's country to country, very different than North America. So I think standardizing on an organizational design across the 3 regions is absolutely critical, but taking into account the nuances associated with each one of those regions. I always start with getting great alignment with sales leaders, particularly for US-based companies, right? There can be that perception from Europe and Asia Pac that, the attention of the marketing team is more America's focused. And I always made it part of my job to travel to the regions and spend time with the sales leaders, not only to build relationships, but understand their challenges, what's going on with partners, who's the competition, et cetera, and getting a really clear understanding of the differences between each one of the regions and in some cases, each one of the countries. Putting in place a consistent processes by which work gets done, the working with the global teams, the global marketing teams, working with product management, et cetera, ensuring that launches are consistent across each one of the regions. So there's a lot of consistency that needs to be put in place, but you have to adjust across the board, even in some cases for brand, the nuances within each region, and make sure you're accommodating that as well.
Yeah, those are some powerful ideas. I want to kind of go back in your experience and ask you about the whole idea of thinking globally. So you've obviously had a lot of experience with global marketing organizations, but for companies that are new to that, maybe they're small and kind of growing, many companies start in the US or in their home market. When do when should companies start to think globally, and how do they take those first steps into a global marketing, global marketing mindset and then a global marketing organization? How do they get there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the minute you open an office with in EMEA, let's say that's the first place, even if it's in one or two countries, you really have to start thinking about globalization. Now, the scale isn't necessary. The fact that you probably have fewer people in EMEA, that the idea of we have to create a very consistent global organization, that probably isn't the case. But what you want to make sure of is that those two countries, as an example in EMEA, that they're on brand, that their nuances are taken into effect when campaigns are being built, that the nuances around messaging are taken into account when it comes to content and collateral, et cetera. There's actually some advantages you can gain right out of the gates, which are when you have a very large global organization. I've had 140 people within the global team. You have to build 80% of your campaigns, put them out into market, and then let them, tweak them in market. Well, when you're just starting out, if you're an American company and now you've moved into two countries in EMEA, you only have to deal with those two countries. So you can customize campaigns for them using local data, using local trends, et cetera. So there's some advantages to that. But getting back to your question, the minute you move into a new region, you have the opportunity to begin to globalize.
Yeah, and so you got to really start to build the team. And is it easier in your experience to hire folks in those regions to do the marketing, or do you hire people in the US to think globally and market for, let's say you're opening an office in, we were just talking about Ireland or in Germany or somewhere in Europe. Do you hire locally? Do you hire the US and have them work for those markets? How do you kind of take those first steps and then grow it from there?
I strongly suggest you hire locally.
Hmm.
And I have even seen this with established organizations where it was US centric and they hired folks in the US to serve countries in EMEA, particularly. And I've seen it where in APJ, for instance, or EMEA, they have large offices where they're hiring people there who are serving the US. And neither one of those work. You have to be embedded in the country, the culture, what's going on to understand the nuances. Somebody that lives in Chicago, there's no way they really understand what's going on in France, Germany, Singapore, Australia at a local level. And so I would highly suggest that you hire locally.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And yet organizations don't always do that, do they? What keeps organizations from following that basic blueprint?
Yeah, well, I think it's always easier if you say, "Hey, we're based in US. We don't, we haven't put anybody in EMEA. Let's hire someone here in the US that can handle it." I think that's easier. And when you think of agencies, we were talking about digital. When you think of agencies, the same holds true. There are certainly agencies here in the US that say, hey, we cover globally. So if you want to run your digital campaigns in EMEA or Asia Pac, that's certainly something that they can do. What I have found, you need to have the local knowledge in the countries to say, look at these are the smaller potentially agencies in Germany, in France, in the UK, and they will do a much, much better job for us than a global organization and probably at less cost.
Yeah, because they understand the local market. They can really be focused there. Talk to me about alignment. Tell me about how you get alignment. You have a large organization, you mentioned 140 people. How do you get alignment in, the senior staff, the junior staff, the managers? How do you kind of get everybody on brand, on message, on, campaigns? And then, a follow-up question we'll talk about later is metrics. How do you think about metrics and reporting so that you understand as a leader what's going on globally?
Yeah, so I think it always starts as the leader of a global organization. What are the company's goals? and what are their priorities. Certainly, if you're in a global role reporting to the CMO, what's the CMO's global priorities, right? It always starts with that. And then put in place consistent goals. I always look at the number three in terms of here are our three goals for this quarter. Make it consistent across all three regions. So it shouldn't be at a level that it's nuanced for Australia, but all goals that are relative to all three regions. Put in place, you talked about metrics, absolutely critical. Having consistency in metrics across all three regions is paramount to keeping alignment. If you have different metrics, which I've been part of organizations where I've come in and the metrics in EMEA are based on what the marketing and sales teams have agreed to, and in the US, but they're different metrics. People are being measured differently. You have to have consistency. And your alignment question is critical. Marketing, both at a global level as well as at a regional level, need to be 100% aligned to sales. And so one of the things that I often did was, I mentioned this before, making sure that I got out to the regions and sat down with the sales leaders, at least once every 6 months or so, to say, okay, how are we doing? What are your priorities, to ensure that the goals set, the strategies, the tactics are all in alignment and we're all marching to the same order. And then the folks who report into the organization, the leaders, as you say, they just have to be aligned to the goals, the metrics, and it's up to them to communicate down and hold people accountable to hit them. But that sales alignment is absolutely critical. It just came to mind. I remember I was in a global role, but I needed to spend about 6 months in EMEA because the EMEA leader wasn't there for a while. And so I was over back and forth for about 6 months. And it was coming time towards the end of the year, and I had not met with the sales leadership from 4 different countries. It was Poland, Italy, Amsterdam, and Munich. I mean, those are the cities and countries. So I set up a trip where Monday I flew into Warsaw, spent the day and evening with sales leadership, flew out the next morning to Milan, Italy, did the same thing, Amsterdam, Munich, and I was home Friday evening. So that isn't something you typically want to do, but that stresses to me the importance of showing up, particularly a US leader, and understanding what's going on with sales and ensuring that you're helping them succeed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you're in alignment, you're talking to sales, you're kind of creating that alignment between the leadership teams. So talk to me about the difference between that kind of alignment where you've got a relationship, you understand their goals, you understand their needs, and a more specific alignment where you say you need, in order to make your goals, you're depending on marketing to produce 30% of your leads, and you need this quality, and you need this conversion rate, and you need this many campaigns, we'll have this level of budget. So did you kind of think of that level of like financial campaign detail alignment, or did you kind of require that of your direct reports to kind of have that level of alignment across globally? Or was it more of a, we want to have consistent themes and relationships that work between different organizations? How do you think about the alignment, numbers plus themes, both? How do you kind of put those together?
Yeah, so where I've seen the most success is when the campaign framework is created across the CMO and the CMO's direct reports. So when I was running, for instance, global demand generation, direct to end user plus channel on a global basis, I sat in the room with the head of product marketing and et cetera, head of comms. And together we built out, okay, here's the campaign framework for next year. Here are our 4 campaigns that we're going to run. And so I brought to the table the nuances and needs of EMEA and Asia Pac, just to ensure that it was part of that campaign framework. So you have your basic group of campaigns. And as I mentioned before, those are used globally. So when you're leading the team, you ensure EMEA, Asia Pac, Americas, here are the campaigns we're using. Here are the metrics associated with each campaign. Here, you talked about financial. how much budget are we going to put against each campaign? And obviously, a lot of that ties to the expected revenue that was going to be coming from that particular set of solutions. And the other piece I did was you have a global organization, they're generating leads, as you said, but highly dependent on inside sales, following up on them, converting those leads, they're getting into the pipeline. So I actually assigned somebody in marketing dedicated to working hand in hand with the inside sales leadership to ensure marketing was providing the tools, the content, the email nurtures, the enablement required so that team from inside sales could be successful, and monitoring all that data. How many leads did we pass? The hot leads, were they followed up within 24 hours? Which leads are working, which ones aren't? So, to summarize, in a global role, you need to, which I always was, be part of the entire strategy around the campaign, be detailed oriented around how much we're going to spend against each one of those campaigns. And that too, David, is nuanced based on, the big 7 countries, Germany, UK as an example, in Europe, and then in Asia Pac. And then following that entire lead funnel and even getting tied to the hip with the head of inside sales. And then reviewing and measuring those metrics. I would be in Tableau every day looking at what's the pipeline look like, what's the close rate look like, so you can make adjustments accordingly.
That's great. I love it. I love the detail and the focus on data at your level. I think people from the outside assume if you're a global marketing leader, you're setting a few themes, you're having dinner with people, you're flying around the world, and this fun. But it sounds like you're deep in the data. You're understanding what's happening. You're accountable for what's happening there.
Yeah, somebody told me once, and I agree, the higher you go in an organization, the more you need to understand the details.
Mm-hmm.
And the other piece of it is I love data and always have. And so even though I've been in marketing for quite a long time, I always recognize the critical nature of how are we going to make adjustments if we don't know what the data is telling us and we're not aligned to sales and we don't have the right reports. So data is critical to driving, and there's nothing more detailed than getting into what campaigns are working in what countries and what regions.
I love it. Yeah, the higher you go, the more you have to understand the details. And you have all the experience because you've worked at all these levels, right? And you're in that role because you understand what's going on at a detailed level, right? You understand the
Yeah,
strategy and you understand what happens when an email it gets sent and what's happening in the CRM, and you get all that, right?
yeah. The other thing too is when you're in, particularly a field organization, just as for an example, in those countries, again, let's just take Australia. If you're the marketing leader in Australia, the sales leadership in Australia doesn't know nor care about the rest of marketing, meaning they're going to go to you as the marketing manager in Australia and they want to know what's going on with the launch. How come this content is coming out? Why aren't we changing it? This messaging would work better. Why do we still have to do this campaign? So I always say to folks when I'm in those type of roles, you need to be the CMO of your business. So if you're running Australia or Singapore or Germany, you're the one person that sales is going to go to and partners. And so you need to have all those details and have a voice back into corporate, which I made sure everyone did.
So you have to hire people that can think that way, maybe a junior person, right? Maybe, not there's anything wrong with this, but right at a school might not have the maturity to be the country leader of, Australia, let's say, right?
Yeah, 100%. 100, but you get inexperienced folks and you train them well. And I'm a huge believer in mentoring.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I ask my leaders as well, you need to focus on mentoring the top talent for numerous reasons. And, people can grow into that if they have the desire.
Yeah, the right people can grow into that very quickly. It's,
Yeah.
it's easy to focus on what goes right through all these organizations, and you kind of talked about your methodology and the strategy there. But in your experience, what goes wrong? What are the biggest problems that a global CMO you know, somebody responsible for demand gen has really got to be worried about what kept you at night up at night thinking
Yeah.
about the different campaigns you're running.
Yeah. So, because, some of these areas are on the other side of the planet, are they sticking to brand? Are
Mhm.
they sticking to the campaigns and the high level messaging? Um, are we making sure that they're going through the same processes that the rest of the company is? What does that mean? That means that they're connecting with product marketing and they're understanding when's the launch coming, when is content coming out. They're tied into that. When those things go off the rails and people are no longer connected and they're off doing their own thing, that's probably the biggest concern when you're in a global role is, are folks going to and you can find this, right? Sales and marketing are close within a region. They're working well together, and maybe sales wants to go in a direction that isn't tied to the brand, but the marketer goes along with it. That's when you get emails coming from customers or coming from an executive that went over to Singapore and saw branding that didn't really look anything like he or she expected it to in the US. So that is the biggest concern at all times, and that's why I keep coming back to the structure and the same goals and the same metrics, is because once those things go off the rails, which they always do, then it's hard to recover from it quickly.
Yeah, so it's that branding and messaging alignment that you got to focus on. So it's more that than it's an individual campaign that doesn't work, or a budget was spent incorrectly, or something like that. That you think of. I'm sure you think about all kinds of problems that could happen,
Yeah,
but those are the big things that could damage you. I guess damaging the brand is probably
yeah,
the thing that you
100%.
worry about.
And here's what I've found, David, is if you went back, 10 years, it was very difficult to get everyone to stay on campaigns and they were spending money a certain way. And we didn't have the tools we have today around Tableau and, data management and all of that. So what I've found is by setting clear goals and providing clear metrics around what has to be achieved, even using Australia, the person running Australia has a goal on what they have to hit for pipeline. They're being held accountable to it. And so they're going to spend their budget in the right way,
Mhm.
right? And so it doesn't always happen that way, but you're more likely to get somebody doing the right thing with the budget using the right campaigns if they're held accountable to.
Yeah, you've set the goals properly. You've set their objectives. You've got the metrics.
Yeah.
But that takes a whole methodology to implement. And did you, in your experience, was that, already in place in these large organizations you joined, or did you have to kind of create that methodology for planning and accountability and metrics through through the work and building out that organization?
Yeah, my last three companies, it was not there. And that was part of the big reason I was brought in, was to get the organization lined up that way. Um, when you talk about it requires a lot of alignment, I think senior marketing leadership, if you come into an organization where a lot of the things we've talked about aren't going correctly, then you need to have sales leadership and marketing leadership sit down and really walk through shared goals. Because without that, without sales aligned and sales on board with, hey, we're going to share some similar goals and metrics, then you're not going to get the consistency, the efficiencies, the alignment that you need. So I always started with that. Let's all get on the same page. What is it we want to measure? What are our goals? What are the KPIs that we're going to hold each other accountable for? And then on a consistent basis, meeting with sales leadership around the world to have reviews and make sure we're on target. That's where it all starts. And then from there, then you can implement the pieces that I've discussed.
Yeah, that's very powerful. There's been a lot of talk lately about remote work coming out of COVID. you are managing a global team, and you talked about travel and face-to-face time, but imagine you also had a lot of time working with people remotely and communicating globally. Talk to me about the value of that, in-person time. Did you have to, bring all the whole marketing team together regularly? Did you have effective tools for managing people working remotely? Did they have to be in the office? In your experience, was it best when they were in the office in country? Could they, how did that all work? How did you think about remote work in a country?
Yeah, so I think it's always better if folks are in the office face to face. You can, especially people that are new in their career, they can learn a lot by just, having lunch with folks who have been there a while and learning along the way. But let's take COVID, where nobody could travel. Prior to that, to your point, yeah, there was a ton of travel. I did have global meetings. We also had regional meetings where from a cost perspective, it's tough to bring together 140 people. So we'd have one event in APJ, one in EMEA, one in Americas, obviously bringing everybody together. But when COVID hit, we had to pivot and come up with new ways of doing it. So we did a bunch of stuff, including the leadership team getting together every Friday just for an hour. It's not work. It's just, hey, let's have lunch and just shoot the breeze. I created these monthly meetings where everybody from all regions would get on the phone, and we would have 2 or 3 examples from APJ, from EMEA, and from Asia Pac of best practices. It could be a campaign they ran that was really successful. It could be an event they did. It could be a digital program. Could be a number of things, stuff they did with partners. And what happened there was somebody would present something from EMEA, and then someone in the Americas would say, wow, I could really do that, use that here in the US. Then I'd encourage them, get on the phone with the person in EMEA. So doing things to create those connections, doing things to get people, because every country in the world is essentially doing marketing the same way, meaning you're either reaching out digitally, you're holding a webinar, you're holding an event. We're using all the same campaigns, but there are, creative ways that people are doing things around the globe that I wanted to make sure were being shared with the rest of the globe, so they didn't have to go create it themselves. I had awards. I had, depending on where in the region, some folks were holding, every 2 weeks they'd give out an award for someone that had done something, or we certainly had yearly awards. I also created something called Catch Somebody Doing Something Great. And it could be once a week I'd send out an email. It could be as simple as, hey, just somebody would send me an email, say, hey, David took time out of his day to show me how to do X, Y, and Z. I just really appreciate his teamwork. I'd send that out to all of marketing and sales, and the response was incredible. People really enjoy seeing themselves written up just for something small, and that everybody is seeing it, so people started to want to be in it. So when you can't be face to face, if you're in these global roles, you get used to traveling. You have to do that, but you have to come up with other ways as well to keep the team connected and collaborating and communicating.
Yeah. Wow. Brian, it's been a very powerful conversation. You've had so much amazing experience leading global teams. I love what you said about, alignment and goal setting and creating process around that, and then sharing about how you manage teams and work with remote work. So this has been really helpful to the audience. Thank you again for taking the time.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes. And so if people want to connect with you and learn more about you, or, maybe interact on some of these topics, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, just go right to LinkedIn. The last name is Bakstran, and absolutely reach out. I'd love to connect.
Great. Well, Brian, thanks again for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.